This is the Soul-Filled Sisterhood podcast, and I'm your host, Nicole Burgess, licensed marriage and family therapist and an empowerment coach for women. The information shared in this podcast is not a substitute for seeking help from a licensed mental health professional. Now here is today's episode. Episode 87. If you tuned in last week, you heard the announcement of the new mastermind group Tamara Powell and I are doing. It's called Stepping into Soul, Shredding Limitations and Labels. And in this program, it's 12 consecutive weeks. It actually begins April 5th. So that means the doors are going to close the Friday before we begin the group coaching program, and it will go until July 3rd. Every single Friday, you will get a live group coaching call with Tamara or I or both of us. And we also have weekly modules that we're going to be putting out to the group as you go through this. The thing that makes us different from some of the other group coaching programs is we're doing a hybrid method, things that, Tamara and I learned from our own experiences of what we really wanted. And what we mean by this is you're going to come up with your own goals. We've definitely got prompts for you to go through, and you're going to create the goals for your business or other areas of your life. And then the modules we have are going to help you dive even deeper of breaking through some of the mindsets that may be holding you back. We know for some of you, if you're an ambitious entrepreneur, a heart-centered entrepreneur, and you had a loud inner critic, or you've been procrastinating, or maybe it's even you're worrying about what loved ones or your clients will think of you if you actually make these changes that you've been craving to do, well, then this program is for you. We're keeping it small. We're limiting it to 12 women. We wanted to create a very intimate space because we didn't want you to get lost in a number. There's many group programs that are out there that, hundreds of people sign up and you're just nothing more than a number, and you're not going to be seen or heard when there's that many people. So we kept it small. We keep it intimate, and we want the women who, if you're right for this or not, because you're an action taker. You are tired of being stuck in this. You're tired of letting the shoulds hold you back. So if this sounds like a program for you, if you're interested in it, go out to steppingintosoul.com and you can find all the details out about what the modules are, the investment, what you're going to get from this, and so much more. This link will also be in today's show notes. And now here is today's episode. Well, welcome, sisters. In today's episode, I want to talk about childhood emotional neglect and being a highly sensitive person. Now, this term, CEN, the childhood emotional neglect, is coined by Dr. Jonas Webb, and I'll list her information in the show notes about the book and everything like that. But part of the reason why I want to talk about it, I know I referenced this in some past episodes, and it's such a common thing in some of the folks that I work with, some of the highly sensitive women that I work with. And emotional neglect is different than emotional abuse. We know emotional abuse is much more about name calling, putting your character down, being passive aggressive in your communication style. Emotional neglect is more about when a parent or parents, caregivers really don't tune into who you are. They don't really tune into your temperament. They don't tune into you at all. And Dr. Webb gives various examples of what that may look like if you growing up. And it's not about blaming your parents. Again, you're adults now. It's just recognizing how that childhood, and I know I've talked about this in so many different episodes, like in episode 17 with limiting beliefs, episode 23, midlife unraveling. There's so many times I've talked about the importance of getting to know yourself, being more aware of what you're telling yourself, and how that impacts you in your relationships and in your business. So some of the things that I've noticed over the years when it comes to highly sensitive people, some of the common parenting styles they kind of grew up with is either we talk quite a bit about how narcissism impacts us. And if you had a narcissistic parent, your issues really impacted them, right? Narcissism is a personality disorder, and so it's a mental condition, but a person typically has a very inflated sense of their own importance. a deep need for excessive attention and admiration. They have troubled relationships, and they often, the bigger key thing is they lack empathy for others. Behind that extreme confidence they have lies a very fragile self-esteem, and that is very vulnerable to the slightest criticism. And if you grew up with a parent who was a narcissist, it makes it very challenging that it's that self-preservation that kicks in when you're growing up, but then that can stay a hold and keep you stuck in that way of being and thinking as an adult, which is going to stop you from going deeper in some of your relationships. It's going to stop you from being seen and heard, putting yourself out there in the world, promoting your business, all of that. Same thing if you had a parent who were struggling with an addiction, you weren't really seen and heard. I often hear it from, girls and adults when they've grown up with a parent who physically they're present, but emotionally they're checked out. So if you got in trouble for school, you may get yelled at before you get the opportunity to even share what it is that happened. It's about tuning into your children. That's really what it is to understand your child is about tuning into them. And if you didn't have that growing up, whether parent was a narcissist, they had addiction issues going on, they were caring for a child or another person that is severely ill or unable to care for themselves, if you grew up with parents that just were depressed themselves, that can impact it. Because again, they struggle with being able to manage their own stuff, let alone tune into you. If there was a grief or loss that then shut that parent down, that impacts you. All these things can impact how you deal with life, how you view life. So one of the things is, we've talked about it, how it's not a given that highly sensitive people are typically more anxious than non-HSP, which is not true. But if you've grown up in an environment like that, odds are your anxiety level is going to be pretty high. Like your tolerance for that discomfort is going to be up there unless you learn how to retrain how you think about things, unless you retrain what that wiring is in your mind. And so you're not reacting to things, you're responding to things. We also know, I just gave a presentation that we also know if you're typically anxious, depression is just right around the corner because you'll deplete your system and then you'll become depressed. Ray Lincoln talks about this in his book, I'm a Keeper. And in episode 6, Stacey Horn and I talked about temperament. So Ray Lincoln doesn't use the Myers-Briggs type indicator, but the identifiers are the same. So I'm going to just reference those really quickly. He gives in his book, if you're an SJ, you're a wonderful helpmate as a kid. SPs are playmates. NTs are mind mates. And NFs are soulmates. But if your parent didn't tune into you, didn't know that about either themselves, they didn't know their own temperament, they didn't know their own Myers-Briggs. Again, like Tamara and I talked about back in episode 85, those things are nice to know. It doesn't mean you get stuck in that label or you're only this way. The reason why those things are good to know is because you gain a deeper understanding of yourself. And when you're able to do that, then you can actually have better relationships. You can run your business better. But if your parent didn't tune into that, what can happen is, like I've talked about before in different episodes, perfectionism can kick in, where you are trying to be everything to everybody. Your self-esteem is in the tank, basically. You just don't believe in yourself. Your self-worth is really low. And when that happens, then you struggle with your own boundaries. And I've talked about that, professional boundaries, in episode 41. Your emotional quotient or your emotional intelligence is not resilient, is probably not so high. And if you want to learn about more of what that is, go back to episode 45. It's being able to know what your temperament is and how that may not have been really seen growing up or acknowledged growing up, so that you can forgive your parents and you can move on. That's truly why Tamara and I do what we do. And that's why we've got this group coming up, the Stepping into Soul, Shredding Your Labels and Limitations. We truly love supporting women in the goals they have set for themselves, whether it's in their business or their life. But more importantly, it's really releasing what no longer serves you. I mean, it's so exciting to watch women continue to become more of who they really are at a soul level. And you create that ripple effect. You don't pass along how you're not allowed to talk about emotions to the next generation or to those around you. You no longer pass along that deep hurt that you feel because you're more in touch with you. You've let those things go from the past. You've released them. You've forgiven them. You've moved on. It's so beautiful to watch women truly unravel what has caused them maybe pain for years, to let them just watch their light come back. Again, as Brene Brown talks about, if you're so armored up, you're not going to let that joy back in your life. And that's what this is about. It's acknowledging that maybe you really truly weren't seen growing up. And it was all about caretaking the caregiver, right? I've seen that way too often in the work that I've done, where roles got reversed. The child begins to take care of the parent due to, their own addiction issues, or there is mental health issues that are not being treated, or the parent is just truly just absent in a lot of ways. And then the child becomes overly responsible for what is going on with the adult or the other kids that are in the household. That's part of that childhood neglect. And then what typically happens is people don't even know their own feelings. They're afraid to go there. They're afraid to be vulnerable as adults. They think like, what's wrong with me? I'm really successful in my business, or I'm successful in my career. I've got the family, I've got the house, I've got money in my bank account. What is wrong with me? Why am I still not happy? It's as if you were trained as a little kid that it wasn't okay for you to actually feel the joy. And that's why using the tools that I've talked about in various places in these episodes, it's going back and giving yourself permission to get to know yourself again. Get to explore some of those emotions, what it means to be truly angry, what it means to be happy, what it means to be joyful, in bliss, having frustrations and be able to communicate that. It's no longer shoving those feelings down. It's no longer avoiding them, because that will then translate into other parts of your life. If you procrastinate very often, right, that anxiety or the fear of what's going to happen or not happen starts to go. The story is getting created in your head. But it also may be like, wow, if I actually go after this thing that I really want, maybe I'll still be disappointed. Well, who knows? If you start to shift your thinking or even get curious, like, what is that really about? What's the fear of me just really embracing that I'm enough, that I've got this, that I don't need 5,000 people to say that I'm enough. I know that from deep within. All these things can be shifted and changed. I know on some level, you probably already know this, that if you want things to be different in your life, that first and foremost, that change has to start with you. Some of that is honestly going back to therapy or going to therapy for the first time and share those fears with the therapist so you can work through those maybe past hurts. Others of it is more like, no, I know it, but I'm really spinning my wheels on what it is, and hire the coach to help you move forward and not be stuck anymore into that. It's about being able to create what it is that you want in your life. It's not worrying about what your parents may or may not think of you, like about you, or whatever. It's like, been there, done that. You're not in that same space anymore. I remember one of my friends that she was on this podcast, she recommended a book. It's called Finding Meaning in the Second Half of Life, How to Finally Really Grow Up. It's by James Hollis, and he's a PhD. And in his chapter, and I've read this to various people that I know, in his chapter, we was talking about parents and getting older, right? And I'm going to quote this. If the aging parent never took responsibility for themselves as younger adults, they may prove especially demanding of their adult children. Why would we expect narcissistically oriented folks to suddenly grow up? As a matter of fact, rather than mellowing, most people become more of what they already were. Those who whine now will whine more. Those dependent now will become children. Those in denial now will blame others. Those who neglected growing up and assuming full responsibility for their emotional well-being will expect you to carry it when their powers decline. That's what part of this is, what Dr. Webb talks about in her books too, that if your parent made you responsible for their feelings, as an HSP, man, we suck that stuff up. And it's recognizing where you also start and stop. That it's like, I'm not responsible for anyone else's emotions. I'm not responsible for anyone else's behavior. I'm responsible to them and how I conduct myself with them. That's it. Nothing more. That's where that over-functioning kicks in when you start to take on other people's stuff. So again, the people pleaser kicks in, which in psychology, we also can term some of that as you become codependent. Your emotions depend upon someone else. You're living through them. It's not the healthy thing. When you start to gain an understanding like, oh, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing as an adult. Remember, in episode 17, I talked about those limiting beliefs. Well, the majority of those little beauties are created by the age of 9, over 80% of them. So if you're an adult, yet you're still thinking as if you were still in that environment, then of course you're doing what you're doing. It's being able to recognize it's like, what am I making this mean? So let me give you an example. When I used to work in the corporate world, I had various managers over many, many years. I would come up with ideas. We either individually or as a group, we would do some brainstorming for things. Or if I would come up with a solution on a specific issue, if I would share that with some of these managers in my mind that I'm thinking of right now, what would typically happen is they would take that idea, take the solution, they'd run with it, and it would be as if they came up with that. There was no credit given back, no nothing. And sometimes that happened when I grew up, that whether it was ideas or something I was saying in a situation, it wasn't acknowledged. It was like run right over. Sometimes parents even took credit for what I actually had said or the solution I had come up with. And that hurt. And when those things don't get acknowledged repeatedly over time, my belief started to be like, wow, I really am invisible. Like my thoughts and feelings really don't matter. Someone else is just going to take a hold of them anyways and move on. And that sucked. Today, I am much better at giving my ideas out freely and letting go of the expectation I'm going to get anything in return or validation. Now, I surround myself with more people who do acknowledge that, which is very helpful. So if you're not around people who are supportive, then look for that. Find that, get that group. But I recognize too that if I don't get acknowledged for that idea, life goes on. It's no longer holding me back saying I need that validation to say that was great so that I can do what I need to do. I mean, it's not uncommon if I send out a newsletter to my email group and I say, hey, would love your feedback on such and such. Sometimes I get it, which is beautiful. I love it because then I can put out more information that is of value to my listeners and my readers. Other times it's crickets. So I move on. I don't take that personal. I keep going forward with it. It's another reason why I do this podcast, right? It goes out there into the ethers and you guys are located all over the world, which is really cool. Sometimes I hear from you, sometimes I don't. But I do this because I hear some of these issues over and over and over, and I really do want to provide value. And I actually like doing the podcast, and I like to be able to do interviews, and I still get nervous when I get interviewed by others. It's so fascinating, right? It's a normal thing. It's about learning how to embrace those fears and move forward anyways. And I know I've talked about this so many times on this podcast and with other guests as well. Each and every one of you has the ability to pivot. You have the ability to allow yourself to feel the feelings that you feel and move through them versus avoid them, stuff them down, or let them blow up, right? If you stuff them down enough, often enough, they will come up in some form or fashion. When you learn how to actually have more self-compassion with you, forgive those past hurts and transgressions, you grow deeper into who you are. Again, it's reconnecting with your soul. It's reconnecting with that higher power, the universe, and know that there are so many forces that want to really conspire with you, not against you. It does not mean bad stuff won't still happen. It does. You're not immune to that. But it's more about looking at, I can allow my fears and stuff from the past continue to stop me from feeling deeply, allowing joy and love in my life, or I can pivot I can begin to learn how to, as Elaine friend had talked about in episode 78, right, with the equine assisted psychotherapy, just about turning up the volume, giving yourself that permission to speak up more and maybe a little louder. I know it can feel really scary to let go of some of these old thoughts, or that if you step into that vulnerability, everything bad is going to happen. Again, examine that story. Fear loves to exaggerate. Fear loves to tell you lies. Just recognizing it's like, I don't have any proof of that. Or maybe you do. Maybe you've had some bad experiences in the past, but the reality is it's your life. And if you want it to start to look different, be different, you have the ability to make that change. So I hope this was helpful for you, and just recognizing that it's so not uncommon for HSPs to not have a parent actually tune into them. And I know for some of you have, which is beautiful, but for many of the ladies that I've worked with over the years, they have not. And so if you didn't grow up with that, it's knowing you have the ability to start to, in a way, reparent yourself, and just recognize that you really truly are enough, and that so many of you are doing such incredible things in our world, and that really is the ripple effect. I encourage you to step into that vulnerability and just recognize that being vulnerable is not there to literally, like, it's not a death sentence. It just means it's an uncomfortable growth edge. That's it. So step into that more. And if you're really looking at up-leveling life, business, really encourage you to go out and check out steppingintosoul.com, where Tamara and I, this program actually begins April 5th. We've got modules out there that we're going to go through. We haven't built every single one of them out just yet, but boy, howdy, do we have some great content. And we both are like, ooh, I really like these things. It's more of, things that we've learned through our own training, through our own experience, and helping other women be able to do the same thing. And we really want to keep it a very intimate space so that we know, Tamara and I know how working in small groups, how that can be extremely powerful, because one, we learn from one another. Two, this is so much why I do this podcast, is I really do want to create a sisterhood in the sense that we come together as women versus fight one another. It's about coming together versus excluding. And that's what Tamara and I are creating with this new group. So go out to steppingintosoul.com, check out all the stuff that you're going to get. It's 12 weeks for 3 consecutive months, and we look forward to getting to know you. And until next time, take care. Thank you for listening. And if you're a female entrepreneur wanting to gain more confidence in speaking up for yourself, being able to respond versus react to events in your life, and live a life that is aligned with you, head over to steppingintosoul.com to sign up for our new mastermind starting April 5th.